I'm Vayoni Dimel. This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. Grow to Strength is a non-profit, non-denominational organization based in Staten Island, New York, focusing on humanitarian work in USA and abroad. Amy Poirier, founder of the organization, has been traveling to Haiti, Dominican Republic, as well as to Sri Lanka, reaching out to those who are in need, in addition to her support to the underprivileged young people in her neighborhood. An open letter recently wrote by Amy to President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry regarding Sri Lanka was published by many news outlets and generated lots of interest as well as some criticisms. Amy joined with us from Staten Island, New York. Amy, first of all, tell us about your open letter to President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry. What prompted you to write that letter?
Well, I consider myself a friend of Sri Lanka. I have friends and ties in Sri Lanka. I had spent a number of months working alongside the Sri Lankan UN peacekeepers, the 11th contingent in Haiti. So I felt like I was sitting around watching and listening to only the negative being told. And I felt that I needed to, as an American, of course, having freedom of speech, wanted to take the opportunity to contact my government and speak to the powers that be, write to the powers that be, and see that if I could perhaps shed a different, more accurate light onto what I know to be true.
In your letter, you make comparisons about how USA reacted when terrorists attacked Americans on US soil and how Sri Lankans responded to terrorism that was there for 30 years. Could you elaborate on that?
You know, I am a natural-born citizen of the United States, so I'm very fortunate that I've had limited exposure to any type of war situation or any type of terroristic activities. But as the world knows, America was attacked on September 11th, and America took a stand. At that time, President George Bush was in office, and he named bin Laden as the most wanted person in the world. And over time, the government was steadfast to capturing. In Sri Lanka, you haven't been as fortunate. You've had over 30 years of a civil war. It's been documented on many, many occasions how the LTTE and the Sri Lankan government tried to work out situations, tried to move forward, tried to bring a democratic country for Sri Lanka. And that didn't happen. And just like it happened in America, where President Obama decided that's it, and he issued an executive order to go forward and take whatever steps needed to be taken to capture bin Laden, I would imagine that your president, your sitting president, also had to come to that very difficult time where he also had to issue that order. Sri Lanka did what had to be taken. War is not pretty. People die during war. Often innocent people, unfortunately, can also die during a war. Nobody wants a war. Nobody's agenda is ultimately to have a war, I don't believe. But both presidents during their time made a very difficult decision to issue executive orders to go forward and do what needed to happen in order for both terroristic acts to stop. And in Sri Lanka, thank God, they were able to finally, after 30 some odd years, put an end to the terroristic activities that were happening in Sri Lanka by the LTT hand.
There was some criticism for your letter saying that you have been misguided and that you are doing propaganda for the Sri Lankan government. What's your response to those criticisms?
Well, I'm an American citizen. I've had the blessing of having been positively exposed to the Sri Lankan military again back in Haiti after the earthquake. I have no ties to the Sri Lankan government. I don't know your president. I would welcome meeting him only because he's a sitting president, and that would be an honor to meet anybody of his stature. However, having said that, I have no ties to your government. Propaganda, I can understand why people would want to believe that, because they have their own agenda or maybe their own propaganda. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I can speak to the fact that anything that I speak about in Sri Lanka has been through my hands-on, eyewitnessed experience.
In your open letter to Secretary of State Kerry, you have said that you will be happy to accompany him if he visits Sri Lanka and show him the areas of improvement in Sri Lanka. Give us a few examples of the improvements you have witnessed in Sri Lanka.
Right. Well, that statement certainly has brought a lot of response. I don't expect Secretary of State Kerry to contact me and say, come on, Amy, I'll meet you in Sri Lanka. However, if I was given that opportunity, what I would do is I would accompany him there, or I would meet him there, and I would be very willing to show him the things that I know to have changed. On my first visit to Sri Lanka, the northern area was closed to foreigners because of landmines, and the area still was not secure and safe. That area, I have not been to that area yet. It is my intention to go to that area when I do return to Sri Lanka. However, my beliefs and my understanding from many sources is that area is open and landmine free. I've seen great change in the area of Colombo itself, which is the main capital. And I do know from my experience and what I have seen and what I have trusted people that are my friends that are Muslim, that are Tamil, that are Sinhala, what they have told me is that growth is gradual, but it is moving in a positive direction. The war was over 30 years. You're post-war, less than 4 years. So growth takes a long time. Change is difficult and uncomfortable, but it is moving in a good direction, I believe.
You have written some touching personal experiences you have had with Sri Lankan soldiers, especially with disabled soldiers. Could you share some of those experiences?
Absolutely. One of my trips into Sri Lanka, I was there to recognize some people in Sri Lanka that had done international humanitarian work. Both in Sri Lanka and outside of Sri Lanka, they had done humanitarian work, what our organization believes to be leading and cutting edge work in helping others for no personal gain. So I was fortunate enough to see a camp outside of military camp outside of Colombo, in the Colombo region, and when I was being driven through the camp, I was struck at the soldiers that were the amputee soldiers, the ones that were missing arms or missing hands or missing legs. And I asked, why are these men here? Why are these soldiers here? What are they doing? And I was kind of taken back, I was confused. And the response that I was given was, these men gave their limbs. There was even a man who gave his eyesight, his one eye, and he's now like a telephone relay person. And the response I was given again was, these men have given of themselves, literally, physically parts of themselves, to ensure the freedom, or in the process of instilling freedom and peace for Sri Lanka. These men made a decision to stay in active military. Therefore, the government, the military, was allowing this and considered them decorated heroes. And these men continue to work and serve their government to the best of their ability, which I think is remarkable. I'm not sure what America does with disabled veterans, but from what I see and what I hear, I don't get the feeling that they're as honored as these men that have given of themselves to Sri Lanka.
Say if you get a few minutes to talk to Secretary Kerry, what would you say about Sri Lanka and how the US government should treat Sri Lanka?
I think one of the biggest things that I would try to stress to Secretary of State Kerry is that Sri Lanka is a nation unto itself. The Sri Lankan government and the people of Sri Lanka are entitled to develop into the nation they choose. And they have an incredible opportunity here. They can really move into great paths and areas of the world, and the economy in Sri Lanka is moving, and education is a focus, and there's so many wonderful things going on. But as Americans, I think there comes a time where we need to stop talking and listen. And maybe we shouldn't be forcing changes on Sri Lanka that Sri Lanka, A, is not prepared for, ready for, or looking to go in that direction. I don't think that Sri Lanka is looking to be a little, a smaller version of America. I think that they are honorable, proud people, and certainly capable of being productive. So we should listen. And in the course of listening, stand alongside them and be friends with them. Be their friends. And most importantly, support them in areas they ask for support, not in areas that another country is pointing the finger and saying, you're wrong here, you're wrong there, you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. We're a different nation, and we have different philosophies and different beliefs, and we should stand as their friend and lend them support where and when it's asked for, not forced upon them.
Amy, in your view, what are the areas Sri Lanka should pay more attention to build unity and harmony among people and move forward as a nation?
One of the things that concerns me, just me personally, is, I see the effects. I stood across from the World Trade Center when it was hit. I stood and watched the second plane hit. I saw the towers collapse. I stood there with my 7-year-old son, and I have seen over a course of all these years the effect it has had on us. And that was a small exposure to terrorist activity. Sri Lanka was actively in civil war for over 30 years. How have the people been affected? How are they expected to just forget it and move on? I think that in order to unify, there needs to be tolerance, there needs to be compassion and empathy for one another, there needs to be healing. And I don't know, I have no idea how that will even begin or how it had started and how it's going to progress over time. But I would imagine that a good portion of the country was witness to some really terrible situations and therefore need to heal. Certainly people that come back from war, certainly people that were in September 11th in America, many of them, including first responders, have been labeled with post-traumatic stress syndrome. Is this something that's happening in Sri Lanka? Can that be addressed? Does it need to be addressed? How do you heal the people? How did the children that witnessed these things, or even just maybe they didn't hands-on see something, but maybe they heard the war in the background, or they certainly have been exposed to the media because it was their country. How are they going to grow up as a whole being and continue to move forward in peace and democracy in the country of Sri Lanka? That's something that I think needs to be looked at or at least entertained.
What are your most cherished memories you have on people of Sri Lanka?
Well, one time I stayed at a friend's house, and when I arrived, he lived in a community, a very family-oriented community. And when I arrived, there was this bony cow down the street. He was on a piece of grass. And I noticed from day to day they would just relocate this cow. And I used to refer to this cow as Happy Cow. And it was explained to me that the children in the community had saved their rupees and had actually saved with the ultimate goal of getting this cow and saving it from slaughter. And the cow was brought to the community where it was being nurtured. But day after day, I would watch a little tiny girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she would carry a bucket of water to the cow every single day without fail. And she did it. The water was sloshing all over, but she did it. And as time went by, this cow went from like a small, quiet moo to when I finally left a couple of weeks later, this robust moo, and really turned into a happy cow. And this was to me like the epitome of what Sri Lanka represents, and how if a child 6, 7, 8 years old could take the responsibility every day to make sure that this cow was nurtured. And I think that that's like a very, very classic example of how Sri Lanka is. You know, they nurture one another, they nurture their surroundings, and they have an ultimate goal of making sure that everybody is okay. And I remember those things. I remember, you know, how you would walk in a mall or in an area and the children were quiet and respectful. I, for the first time in my life, saw grown adults lay at the feet of their mothers and their fathers and worship them. You know, I had never seen that in my life. I mean, I think that these are things that I will take with me for the rest of my life. Certainly, I have the 6 months in Haiti where I saw the Sri Lankan UN peacekeepers through the 11th contingent. They were incredibly compassionate. It was days after the earthquake that I arrived there. They were incredibly compassionate, wonderful humanitarian men that were incredibly professional, took food from their own lunch packs and fed babies. So, I mean, these are things that I'll always remember.
Amy, last but not least, have you got a response from Secretary Kerry to your letter? Do you have any plans to follow up on your letter?
No, I have not heard from him as of yet. He's a very busy man. I don't even know if he's in America at this point. I would not be surprised if I did hear from him. And my intention is, yeah, after whatever finally happens in Geneva takes place, I will follow up. And not because I think that I have the answers, but because I am an American citizen with freedom of speech. And I think that it's important that when we see things, that we say them. And that we tend to only look at the negative in life. And why not talk about the great things that are happening in Sri Lanka? Listen, I'm sure that there are people that are uncomfortable. I'm sure that there are still unfortunate situations that are happening, but I believe that they are working consciously towards the positive and moving forward.
That concludes our news edition. We meet you again with another news edition of News, Views and Entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.